I often find myself reflecting on the times when life seemed simpler, when our relationship was full of shared dreams and laughter. Rachel and I used to sit on the porch together, sipping coffee and talking about our future. We were young, full of ambition, and even with our hectic schedules, we always made time for one another. But over the years, as our careers took over, we gradually drifted apart. We chose to ignore the widening gap between us, always fixated on the next project or deadline. Now, it feels like we're living in separate worlds, struggling to find our way back to each other. Lately, I can't shake the unease that's been creeping over me. Rachel spent months doing fieldwork in a remote community in Utah, completely immersed in her PhD research. Since her return, she's been consumed by her thesis, spending all her time locked away in her study. The house feels quieter and more distant without her presence. Meanwhile, I sit alone at my desk, grappling with the growing emotional distance between us. It feels like Rachel's ignoring my attempts to address what's happening, and I'm running out of ways to bridge the divide. A little background. I'm James Bennett, a geologist working in oil exploration. I'm good at what I do, having been recruited right after grad school. Rachel, my wife, is an academic with a deep passion for research and teaching. We met in college in Colorado, got married 5 years ago, and both pursued our master's degrees, hers in sociology, mine in geology. Even though we took different paths, we've always supported each other. But recently, things have started to change. Rachel spent 2 months in Utah for her research, far longer than she'd planned. During that time, she didn't keep in touch, claiming she had no access to phones or email, which seemed a bit hard to believe. When she finally returned, she shut herself in her study, focusing solely on her thesis, and we barely communicated. I've tried reaching out, but it feels like she's keeping me at arm's length. Her research on a splinter group from the Mormon Church, conducted in a closed-off community, is important, but the way she's been handling it is only pushing us further apart. I've started to question whether my perception of that closed community was ever accurate. How did Rachel, an outsider, manage to gain their trust for so long? Maybe they made an exception for her. Did they know she was researching them? These questions swirled in my mind, but Rachel shut me down every time I tried to talk about her research. I admire her dedication to finishing her PhD, but something feels off since she came back. Her lack of communication is troubling, and when I tried to bring it up, she got defensive, as though I couldn't possibly understand the complexity of her work. She refuses to talk about her 2 months in Utah, even though she had shared her research plan with me before she left. Now, after completing her fieldwork, she won't discuss it at all. It left me feeling shut out from this chapter of our life. Even the simplest, non-confrontational questions seemed to upset her. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like Rachel was hiding something important from me. The tension between us just kept building, and Rachel became more secretive with each passing day. She promised to explain everything once her thesis was finished, but that didn't bring me any peace. I kept asking myself, why not tell me now? The most striking change I noticed when she came back was her appearance. Before, she dressed like any other 26-year-old woman, stylish but not overly revealing. Now, she wears ultra-conservative clothing, long dresses that cover her neck and ankles. She stopped wearing makeup and perfume, and her once beautiful hair is always pulled back in a bun. When I commented on her new look, she shrugged it off, claiming she preferred the more modest style because it helped her stay in the right mindset for her research. At night, it was no better. She wore plain, long nightgowns and refused any physical closeness, saying it would interfere with her emotions and research. Despite my best efforts, she remained distant, absorbed in her thesis rather than in our relationship. Our home no longer felt like home. Rachel had also picked up a stomach infection during her trip, leaving her frequently nauseated. However, she refused to see a doctor, insisting she was getting better. Then, her sudden urgency to finish her thesis took me by surprise, especially considering she had 2 more years to complete it. When I questioned why she was in such a rush, she explained that she wanted to return to teaching high school in the fall and needed her degree by then. While that reasoning made some sense, it still didn't seem entirely logical. We'd always made major decisions together, but now she was handling everything on her own, which was straining our marriage even further. When I asked where she was applying for a teaching job, she told me she hadn't decided yet and was too busy to think about it. I offered to help, but she insisted I stay out of it and handle things in her own time. Her obsession with finishing her thesis and earning her degree seemed to take precedence over everything else, including our marriage. I felt left out of her decisions, and it troubled me that she no longer seemed to recognize how deeply intertwined our lives were. Her choices affected me, yet I had no say in any of them. Time passed, and our conversations remained shallow. While Rachel's health improved, our marriage continued to disintegrate. I stayed busy with my work as a research geologist, but Rachel refused to discuss any of our plans together, leaving me unable to coordinate my upcoming trips with hers. Our life was unraveling, and I felt more and more like a stranger in our own home. My anxiety grew, and it even started to manifest physically. I need structure and hate surprises, but Rachel was turning everything into a chaotic blur of uncertainty. I began to fear she was leaving me for her academic ambitions, and that fear left me feeling completely miserable. In the evenings, I'd try to start a conversation, asking her about her progress. But whenever I asked about her living arrangements during her research, she'd become defensive and angry. She refused to answer any of my questions until her thesis was finished, which only fueled my growing suspicions and frustration. Our once loving marriage was falling apart. We hadn't been intimate since before either of us left for our respective trips. She insisted that any physical contact would interfere with her research, which made me question what exactly she had been doing. If being close to her husband could mess with her work, what did that say about the nature of her research? I started to wonder if she had broken her promises of fidelity. Her refusal to talk about anything made everything worse. She moved my workspace into the dining room and locked me out of the den. When I directly asked her if she had been unfaithful, she reacted with hostility, insisting she wouldn't discuss her research until her dissertation was done. It was clear our marriage was in serious trouble. My stomach churned with anxiety, and I dreaded coming home. It felt like Rachel was no longer mine, but was instead consumed by her degree. Our once happy life together was slipping away, and I couldn't help but wonder if other couples faced similar struggles when one partner got lost in their thesis. Her constant self-imposed deadlines only made it worse. After a particularly heated argument, I finally snapped. "Rachel," I said angrily, "you've destroyed our trust and communication. I think our marriage is almost over, and it's your fault." I kept criticizing her before storming out of the house, driving aimlessly to try and calm down. As I drove, I tried to process everything. Rachel kept telling me she still loved me and hoped I felt the same. I reassured her that I did, but I couldn't stand how she was treating me. She refused to talk about anything important, like our marriage or her loyalty. My anxiety only grew as I wondered if she had been unfaithful or crossed boundaries for the sake of her research. I couldn't keep living in this turmoil. Something had to change, whether it was her decision or mine. I thought about leaving her and starting over, but I couldn't imagine my life without her. In the end, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I considered contacting someone at her university who might be able to shed some light on her behavior. Reflecting on the drastic changes in her appearance and the emotional and physical distance between us, I was alarmed. The woman I had once loved seemed to have transformed into someone unrecognizable. She showed no interest in my life or feelings, and our connection, both physical and emotional, had vanished. I started avoiding her, which only widened the gap between us. Her insistence on keeping a locked door and password protecting her computer added fuel to my suspicions. When I confronted her about it, she dismissed my concerns, telling me not to worry about her work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Despite her reassurances, my distrust kept growing. She refused to share any details of her research, saying it would disrupt her progress. This level of secrecy was new and unsettling in our marriage. I told her I felt shut out, but she dismissed it as unimportant. As I tried to handle the situation, I remembered my boss's suggestion to speak with Rachel's thesis advisor. I made an appointment and decided to investigate our finances and her computer while I was at it. In the meantime, I found nothing unusual in our bank accounts, but I arranged for a tech expert to help me access her computer while she was out. I felt guilty about snooping but figured I needed answers that Rachel wasn't willing to give me. The opportunity came when Rachel told me she had to meet with her thesis committee the following Tuesday, which gave me the perfect window to dig deeper. With the help of my tech-savvy friend, I set out to uncover whatever secret Rachel was hiding. When Tuesday morning came, nothing had changed. There was no affection, no real connection, just the same distant behavior. Rachel continued wearing loose, conservative clothing that covered her figure. I decided to wait a bit longer before confronting her, but I knew the time was coming soon. I had to either confront her or consider divorce. Fortunately, we had no children, so that complication was off the table. I met with Dr. Samuel Green in his office. He was polite and confirmed that he was indeed Rachel's thesis advisor. He also verified that she had a research expense account, but he wasn't sure if she had submitted any expenses. His secretary later provided me with a detailed account. When I asked about an unexpected twist in her research, he acknowledged it but said Rachel should be the one to explain it to me. He mentioned that her research required revisions, but her committee supported her work. He advised me, as her husband, to have an honest conversation with her about everything that happened during her research and emphasized the importance of forgiveness in marriage. His words only increased my anxiety and suspicions. I also asked about her communication setup, and he confirmed that she had been using her audio equipment to stay in touch with her committee. When I asked about her living arrangements during her research, he told me that she would address that in her presentation but couldn't discuss it without her consent. He found it odd that she had asked him not to speak to me about it, which only heightened my concerns. As I left the office, the secretary handed me a file with Rachel's financial records, which I decided to keep for later. Driving home, my suspicions continued to grow. Dr. Samuel Green hadn't relieved my worries. Instead, they had deepened. There was no concrete proof of infidelity, but the secrecy was starting to feel like a huge red flag. At home, I hid the file in my desk and didn't mention the meeting with the Dr. Samuel Green to Rachel. It felt strange keeping something significant from her for the first time. We had a brief conversation, but the tension between us lingered. I told her that her behavior was making me suspect infidelity, and that it had to change or our marriage would be over. She just grimaced and gave a forced smile, promising to explain everything once her thesis was approved. On the day of her thesis defense, Rachel wore the same conservative outfit she always did. I suggested she might want to dress up for such an important occasion, but she brushed off my suggestion, claiming that her appearance didn't matter in her field. After she left for her defense, I contacted my tech friend, who was ready and waiting to help. He arrived with his gear and swiftly accessed Rachel's computer. He copied all of her emails and files, and even erased any traces of our investigation. Once the job was done, he recommended I store the backup disks in a secure place. So, I rented a safety deposit box and placed the disks there, knowing full well that the contents could shatter everything we had. When Rachel came back that evening, she seemed excited and upbeat. She had gone out to eat in the city and called to tell me to grab a burger for dinner. I asked how her thesis critique had gone, and she smiled, telling me it had exceeded her expectations. Her thesis was accepted for publication, and all the final pieces had fallen into place. She was practically glowing with joy, saying, "I'm nearly done. Everything's going perfectly." I was almost jumping for joy. "See, I told you my dress didn't matter." My research spoke for itself. I congratulated her repeatedly, but when I tried to embrace her with a hug and a kiss, she pulled away, almost as if she didn't want any physical contact. "I can't kiss you like we used to," she murmured, sounding both confused and frustrated. I asked, "Your degree is secured, and your research is complete. Why can't we just focus on us now?" She pulled further back, her face hardening, and said, "We can't go back." I pressed her, demanding to know if this meant our marriage was over. She simply asked for one more week to sort out some final matters with grant finances and graduation fees. Frustrated, I accused her of stalling and keeping me on hold. A new argument erupted, and after some hesitation, I reluctantly agreed to wait. But I warned her, if there was any further delay, I would start looking into divorce lawyers. I stormed out, needing to get away and think things over. I went for a long walk, my mind racing with frustration. That night, I couldn't sleep, and Rachel appeared restless as well. The next morning, something caught my attention. Her body had changed. Her stomach, which had always been flat, now had a subtle bump. A wave of horror washed over me as I realized she was pregnant. The timing left no room for doubt. The child couldn't be mine. She must have been pregnant before she came home, and everything about her secrecy suddenly made sense. Enraged, I shook her awake, my anger boiling over. She screamed, struggling to pull away, but I held her down. "You're pregnant with another man's child," I shouted, unable to contain my fury. "No more excuses. You're going to tell me everything right now." I stormed out of the room, slammed the door behind me, and tried to calm myself with a cup of coffee, but my rage only intensified. I smashed a glass in frustration. I knew in that moment, I had just entered the worst day of my life. When I called Rachel to the table, she entered, looking terrified, still dressed in her worn, loose clothing. I demanded she put on something proper, but she told me her old clothes no longer fit because of the pregnancy. She confessed she had known she was pregnant from the moment she returned, but she hadn't had the courage to tell me. She explained that she believed the pregnancy was a result of what had happened during her research trip. Michael, the head of the family she had stayed with, had forced himself on her, and she had felt trapped. She couldn't escape or get help because his family had connections that controlled the local authorities. The situation escalated from being forced into sex to eventually submitting voluntarily, feeling she had no other choice. As she cried, my anger began to fade, replaced by confusion and sorrow. If she had truly been attacked, everything I thought I knew had been wrong. I had always dismissed such stories, thinking they didn't happen here. But now, hearing her words, I realized how little I understood. Though my mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge, I needed to hear everything first. "I'm sorry you were hurt," I said, my voice softer now. "But that doesn't explain why you've kept me at a distance or why you continued to see him willingly. It doesn't explain the secrecy, the new habits, or why you pushed me away. There's more here, Rachel. You need to tell me everything." I pressed her. "Our marriage is still in trouble, but you're starting to make me feel like there's hope if you're honest with me." She sobbed harder, but I couldn't tell if it was from guilt or because she knew she had been caught. "I've been trying, Jake. This is so difficult. I was going to explain it to you bit by bit, but now you've forced me to start before I was ready. Please let me tell you everything in the order I planned." I hesitated, but finally said, "Okay, but it all has to come out today. No more dragging this out." "Yes, everything today, I promise," she replied, sounding exhausted. "Rachel, before you continue, you should know that I've been looking into things. I spoke with your Dr. Samuel, and I copied everything from your computer. This is your one chance to be completely honest with me." I grabbed a tape recorder, set it up, and pressed record. I also took her cell phone and turned it off, ensuring there would be no interruptions. Only then did she begin to speak. "Rachel?" I interrupted, unable to process what she was saying. "Are you telling me you grew up in one of those polygamous families?" She took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, Jake. My mother was the fourth wife in a family just like the one I studied for my research. When I was 11, she escaped with me. We fled in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind, and eventually found a safe place in Colorado. That's where we rebuilt our lives. I never spoke about it until now." She paused, her exhaustion palpable. She asked for a break, and we stepped outside for a walk. For the first time since her return, she reached out and held my hand. We walked in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Afterward, we returned, and I fetched some water and fruit to ease the tension. "My childhood experiences deeply shaped my academic interests," she began again, her voice quieter now. "I wanted to understand that world, the one I grew up in, but from an adult's perspective. The next part of my story is going to be hard for you to hear, but I promise I'll be as honest as I can. She looked down for a moment before continuing. The family I stayed with during my research, well, they were part of my old family, the one I escaped from. They were suspicious of me at first, but I convinced them to let me stay, pretending that I might return permanently. Michael, the head of the family, was a tall, muscular man in his 50s used to total control. He set strict rules, one of which was that I had to give up my wedding ring. I didn't have a choice if I wanted to stay and finish my research, so I complied. Her voice trembled slightly as she remembered. He asked me, "What's in your backpack?" I told him it was just my clothes, personal items, and my computer. He grabbed the computer, smashed it with a hoe, and tossed it away. Then, he took my purse and the $1,000 inside it, saying women weren't allowed to have money in his house. I was relieved I had hidden some cash near the bus station. That's when I realized I wasn't a guest. I was a captive, needing his permission for everything, even my research. I had no choice but to agree to all his rules. She looked at me, her eyes softening. Losing the computer was why I became so reclusive when I came back. I had to reconstruct everything from memory, including the emotional reactions I experienced, which were crucial to my research. Caused a lot of anxiety, both there and when I returned home. But it was just a small part of what I was dealing with. I had agreed to follow the rules without causing any disruptions, and it fit with the research I was doing. You might wonder why Michael even allowed me to stay, given that I was an outsider. The truth is, he was related to me, though not by blood. He was 20 years older than me and became the head of our family after my father died. When I arrived, I was given a bed in the attic with his other wives. Michael slept downstairs and the children stayed with us. I was expected to work like the other women, dress like them, and obey the rules. She hesitated, then went on. The first wife went through my suitcase and found my birth control pills. She threw them out, saying they were unnatural and against God's will. My underwear was also taken and burned. I had to wear plain white cotton garments from then on. There was no protest. Either I followed their rules or I had to leave. She looked down, resigned. That night, I didn't think much about losing the pills. We weren't intimate, and I figured I could start again once I was home. I settled into a routine, and over time, I gained the trust of the other wives. That allowed me to gather a lot of information. I couldn't keep a diary, so I had to rely entirely on memory. That's why I needed so much privacy when I came back. As she spoke, I scribbled down notes, trying to process everything. In my second week there, she continued, Michael told me he would take me as his fourth wife. I was shocked. I'd already been married. But Michael didn't care. He told me that God had revealed to him that I was meant to be his wife. When I protested, he became aggressive. He dragged me to his bedroom and threatened violence if I didn't comply. He attacked me, and from that moment, I knew I was trapped. Her voice quivered as she took a breath. From then on, he treated me like his wife. He was controlling, dominating, and I eventually became submissive. Over time, I started to accept that role, and in a strange way, I even began to enjoy it. I started disconnecting from my life with you, Jake, and began to embrace this new reality. The other wives, they shared similar experiences. After weeks of confinement, Michael allowed me to visit other families. By then, I had gathered most of the information I needed for my research. I also became the community's teacher, developing lesson plans that adhered to their strict beliefs. In their eyes, I was no longer an outsider. I was one of them. Her voice dropped even lower, and I had to strain to hear her. One night, after a party for Michael's daughter, I saw my chance to escape. I grabbed my hidden credit card, left a note, and walked the road my mother and I had taken so many years ago. After almost 8 miles, I was exhausted, but I caught a ride to the bus station. I retrieved the cash I'd hidden and then, you know the rest. I returned home and started documenting everything. I secluded myself to write, shutting out all emotions, including our relationship. She sighed deeply, the weight of everything she just shared settling in the room. That's why I needed so much privacy, Jake. My mind had to be free from any emotional distractions, including sex with you. Now, my dear husband, she said, her voice wavering. This next part is going to be even harder. Do you want to ask questions? Or should I continue? I decided to let her continue, feeling the fragile threads of our marriage already slipping through my fingers. She took a deep breath before speaking again. I've had time to think about the two lives I've lived. They're so different, each with its pros and cons. Honestly, I've come to appreciate the rural communal life. The idea of multiple wives has its benefits, and I've explored all of this in my thesis. I'm also writing a novel based on my experiences, and I've already received a $50,000 advance for it. These past few months, I've been busy. She paused, her gaze steady. Jake, the wives got along well, competing to please Michael. What once made my mother and me flee now seems less serious to me. After reflecting, I believe that people need to fit into their culture to truly be happy. I've come to accept their way of life, even if it contradicts everything we used to believe in. I couldn't hold back any longer. So, getting attacked doesn't bother you anymore? That's not just wrong. It's evil. She ignored my comment, continuing without pause. Let me explain why I haven't been physically intimate with you. At first, I was concerned that if we had sex, it would cloud my memories of what happened with Michael, memories that I needed for my research. Then, when I became pregnant, my desire for intimacy just disappeared. Over time, I realized I was caught between two very different worlds, and two very different men. I couldn't keep living this way. In the outside world, I'm married to you, and we shared tenderness, affection, love. But with Michael, I became submissive, and that dynamic became something I needed. I craved the wild, dominant sex with him. Now that my thesis is done, I have to make a choice. Do I stay with you? Or do I return to Michael? I can't have both. If I go back to him, I have to be faithful to him, and I cannot have been with you. If I stay with you, you'll have to accept that I'm carrying his child. I still wear your wedding ring because Michael made me keep it. He didn't buy a new one since he already had one for me. What started as an attack became a dominant submissive relationship that I willingly participated in. It was new, it was exciting, and it filled something in me that I didn't know was missing. Now I have to decide, do I choose this life with you, or do I return to him and his world? It's not an easy decision. She stopped, letting her words settle, but her gaze never left mine. I've already told my thesis committee everything, including how I came to accept and even enjoy that dynamic with Michael. They know I'm pregnant, but they don't care about that part. They only care about the academic side. Now, I'm ready to answer your questions, but I hope you'll be civil as I've tried to be. I sat there, stunned, trying to make sense of her words. My mind was moving too fast, trying to piece together the wreckage of what I had just heard. I quickly realized I didn't need any more details about her computer or financial records. The tape recorder would be enough. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fury rising inside me. You've completely shut me out of your decisions, I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. You've forgotten everything we promised each other. You swore vows, for better or for worse, forsaking all others. But you took another lover, had a child with him, and destroyed our marriage. You've pushed me out of your life, and now, the option of us staying married is gone. I'm done. Our marriage is over. I leaned forward, the words spilling out before I could stop them. You have two choices now. You can try to go back to Michael if he'll take you, or you can raise this child alone just like your mother did. But you won't have my help, financially, emotionally, or otherwise. You've tortured me for months, and now this relationship is dead. You killed it. Tomorrow I'll see a divorce lawyer. You chose research and infidelity over our marriage, and now you're going to face the consequences. You used me and gave your heart and body to someone else. Don't expect me to pay a dowry to another man to take you off my hands. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. How do you expect me to do that? I asked, my voice thick with resentment. She snapped back quickly. I have my own money, my grant money, and the advance on my novel. I don't need anything from your precious bank account. I can take care of myself. Rachel, you've used me, not loved me, I replied sharply, my words cutting through the air. All these years, my hard work funded your research while your grant only covered tuition. I paid for everything else, never once questioning you. But you were unfaithful, not just physically but financially as well. Did you marry me just to make your life easier? To get your degree? You've broken my heart, and it seems like you don't even care. You lied when you said you loved me. I have no desire to be anywhere near you anymore. She winced, shaking her head slowly. James, I did love you. All these years, I wanted you to accept me, all of me. I wanted you to show your love by accepting my flaws, without all the complaints, she said, her voice shaky. But you let your emotions destroy our marriage? I shot back, feeling the sting of every word. You broke my heart, and now you can't fix it. You don't understand love or loyalty. Did you really expect me to just accept your infidelity as a form of love? What kind of person have you become? You're just like him now. The realization hit me hard. She had shared all of this with her academic peers but kept it hidden from me. I had always been just a footnote in her life. Are you going back to him? I asked, my voice rising. Do you even understand what the consequences will be? He's not going to welcome you back with open arms. He'll probably punish you. He might beat you to set an example. You escaped once, but if you go back, you won't get out again. He'll see it as his right to discipline you. If you go back to him, you're risking your life and the life of your child. I won't be a part of it. I didn't know if what I said was true, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, the reality of what she was considering. You think you can take care of yourself? I sneered. You'll find out if you go back. Be very careful, Rachel. If you value your life, you better think long and hard about your decision. I couldn't fathom how someone so intelligent, someone I thought I knew so well, could even entertain the idea of returning to that life. Was she out of her mind? It was like I was talking to a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I walked around the room, trying to shake the fog of disbelief, but nothing made sense. The sun had set on our marriage, and I could feel it, the finality of it all. Rachel, this morning I was just angry. Now I'm exhausted. I'm drained, and honestly, I'm numb. Some part of me feels relief because at least I have closure. Now I have to figure out how to live without you. You're dead to me now. She sat in silence, staring at the wall. I could feel the weight of everything in the room, but I needed to clear my head. I went for a walk, trying to process the mess Rachel had made. She had created her own punishment, but there was someone else who still needed to feel the consequences of crossing me. I was determined to make Michael pay for his role in destroying everything. When I returned, I slept on the couch, my mind swirling with plans. The next morning, I called in for 2 weeks off from work. Rachel had already made coffee. I couldn't bring myself to be kind. Enjoy it, Rachel, I said. You won't be getting any coffee when you go back. There are plenty of things you won't enjoy, but you'll get your dominant sex. We'll be divorced soon. Keep the $50,000, but don't expect any part of this house. It's going on the market today. I had plans for Michael, plans I wasn't ready to share with her. Get ready to find somewhere else to live. I'm moving to the corporate apartment this afternoon. I'll get the rest of my things later. From now on, we'll communicate through lawyers. Here's your cell phone. I packed my things in silence, taking the tapes with me in case the divorce turned into a battle. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing good about this anymore. She was just another obstacle I had to remove from my life. The next day, I closed our bank accounts, transferred the money to new accounts, and canceled our joint credit card. I applied for a new one. I met with a divorce lawyer and arranged everything. My boss was supportive, offering me time off and help if I needed it. I told him I just wanted my paycheck to go into my new account and that I'd handle any calls from Rachel. The day was consumed with moving forward. The following day, I went back to our old home. Rachel wasn't there. I gathered the things I still needed: tapes, books, clothes, tools, personal items, and my cello. I contacted the realtor to update my contact information. They told me they couldn't list the house without Rachel's signature. Fine, I said. Let her handle the mortgage, the lawn, and the broken toilet. I left her a note with my new contact info, though I doubted she'd reach out. I told her I wanted to talk. Not about the divorce, but about Michael. The more I knew about him, the better chance I had of making him pay for what he did. I was focused now. I was done with Rachel. Michael was my target. I wrote a heartfelt note, asking Rachel to meet and help me understand Michael's mindset and daily routine. She had no idea that she was becoming an unwitting informant. Afterward, I returned to the city to see my lawyer. Armed with the tapes and computer files, I told him everything. I refused any pre-divorce counseling and insisted on splitting everything 50-50, including Rachel's advance for her novel. I wouldn't agree to alimony or child support. I demanded she give up my last name and that her child not carry mine. I wasn't going to let my name be tarnished by this mess. I wrote a large check from my new bank account, not caring about the cost. What I needed was freedom. Freedom from Rachel, from the marriage, from the hate. With a clear head, I could focus on my true priority, making Michael pay. That night, Rachel called. She wanted to talk. We arranged to meet for lunch the next day in our former hometown. I slept soundly for the first time in months, feeling calm and determined. Rachel was now just history to me. I packed a few things for my upcoming trip, and when I met Rachel at the diner, she looked different. Glowing in a modern prenatal dress, a little makeup, as if she was adjusting to her new life. I wished the child had been mine. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, a reminder of the man she had chosen. The waitress seated us in a quiet corner. I took a moment to assess her, but there was no trace of the woman I once knew. I proceeded cautiously. "You're adjusting well," I said, trying to sound neutral, though it didn't matter to me anymore. "James," she began, her voice hesitant. "I want to apologize for how I said things the other day." I responded flatly, "Rachel, it's not how you said it, but what you did. Our divorce is inevitable. You'll get the papers soon. The divorce will free you to return to Michael or to live as a single mom. It also frees me from any obligations to you or your child. I can't forgive your infidelity. I'm trying not to hate you. You were a prisoner, but you didn't try to escape. Maybe that was for the best, but what you experienced wasn't entirely like being attacked by a stranger. My mind is still confused by it. I'm here to understand your life there," I added quickly, cutting her off before she could respond. "Not to discuss the sex. I want to know about your daily routine, Michael's work, the community's name and location. I'm not interested in your personal encounters." We ate in silence. When Rachel finished, she began to explain her plans to return to Michael. My warnings about his potential violence had shaken her, but she needed to figure out the terms of her return. She was still torn between me and him, her heart caught in two worlds. Her words ignited my anger again. "Rachel," I said, my voice hard, "I told you our marriage is over. Your divided heart. My heart is crushed. Your consideration of another man broke us. Infidelity isn't just about sex. Maybe someday you'll understand the depth of your betrayal. You promised me loyalty in front of everyone. You trashed that for a degree and some wild sex. I'm no longer part of your future." I shifted the conversation back to my original purpose, asking her about life in Michael's household. She told me everything I wanted to know without suspicion. Michael was religious, superstitious, and a control freak. He took pride in dominating his family, was highly respected in the community, and had frequent sex with his wives, sometimes 2 or 3 times in one night. Rachel admitted she enjoyed trying to keep up with him, likely in an attempt to provoke me. I didn't comment, though it stung. I left the diner with my mission clear. Michael was going to pay for his arrogance. Afterward, I went to see Rachel's mother, who was home from her teaching job. We sat at her kitchen table, where I shared the news of Rachel's pregnancy. Her mother congratulated us, but her joy quickly turned to shock when I told her everything about the past few months. She had no idea how deep Rachel's involvement with her old life had gone. To her, the escape had been a trauma akin to fleeing a concentration camp. Seeing her only child return to that life shattered her. We cried together, united in the pain of our shared loss. In that moment, I found a small comfort in her presence. As the sun set, we stood in a tight embrace, tears flowing. Hers dampening my shirt, mine wetting her hair. After what felt like an hour, we reluctantly parted. She invited me to stay the night, and I gratefully accepted. The next morning, after a real breakfast and proper coffee, I resumed my drive to my parents' home. I promised to stay in touch with Rachel's mom. She was a wonderful person, inside and out, and I couldn't help but notice how much Rachel had once resembled her. Before Michael entered the picture, I had harbored nothing but hatred for him, but now it was growing stronger. On the road, I called my parents, but there was no answer. I tried Dad's cell, and he picked up, telling me that he and Mom were visiting my brother. I decided to extend my trip and join them, hoping that the reunion would help ground me as I started to rebuild my life without Rachel. I stayed at a motel before reaching my brother's apartment. He had just returned from Afghanistan, where he'd served as an infantry company commander. After the usual greetings and hugs, I asked if we could spend some time together in the living room. As the day went on, I suggested ordering pizza, salads, and soft drinks. Once everyone was gathered, I told them about the divorce. Mom cried immediately, and Dad, with concern in his eyes, asked if reconciliation was possible. I started from the beginning, explaining Rachel's research, my work trip, and the changes that followed. We were briefly interrupted by the arrival of the pizza, but I continued on, detailing her pregnancy and the complex situation I now found myself in. As I spoke, the pain inside me resurfaced, swirling in with the anger I'd been carrying. Mom clung to Dad, crying harder. Dad, though emotional, held back his tears, but I noticed his hands trembling. My brother stayed quiet, his military training showing in the way he kept his composure, his posture stiff and calculating. Finally, he stood up and walked away, deep in thought. When I finished speaking, he turned to me and said, "James, we need to talk. Let's take a walk." He pulled me up from the couch and we excused ourselves. We drove to my motel, told the family we'd be back in an hour or so, and then he began speaking. "James, you're in a battle, and you might not be ready for it. Let me show you how to fight this war," he said, taking control of the conversation. "There are rules you have to follow if you want to win. You might lose Rachel, but you don't have to lose the war. Michael is your enemy, and you need to take him down without taking unnecessary hits. I don't need to know all the details right now, but after you win, you can tell me everything." He paused for a moment. "First, understand your enemy, his strengths and weaknesses. Then match your strengths to his weaknesses. Don't let him use his strengths against you, and never let him exploit your vulnerabilities. Pick your moment carefully. The element of surprise is critical. If possible, make it a surgical strike, quick and precise. Don't cause unnecessary damage. Keep it secret, keep it clean, and don't let your emotions drive the decisions. Your plan should be fast and efficient, not drawn out. Remember, success requires more resources than you think. You'll need good luck, but most importantly, be careful. Keep this between us. Don't share it with Mom or Dad. You're already in this battle, so follow these guidelines." We drove back to his place, and the next morning, after breakfast, Mom and Dad left for home. I followed them, needing to retrieve something from their attic, something even they didn't know about. I stayed for a few days, sleeping in my old room. Mom slowly started to recover, and Dad and I spent long hours talking about my future, though nothing was mentioned about my plans for justice. We simply enjoyed being together as a family. Eventually, it was time for me to move on. While Mom and Dad were out shopping, I went to the attic, found what I needed, and loaded it into my SUV. The next day, I hit the road again, heading back to my apartment. My boss had been pushing for another expedition, and with Rachel out of the picture, it was easier to accept. I told my parents I'd be heading out for a 2-month trip to the equatorial Atlantic off Africa, though it wouldn't start until I'd used up all my remaining leave. I had up to 3 months before I had to return. In Utah, I put the weapon, still in its boxes, into short-term storage. I knew satellites could track us, so I picked up some furniture from my former residence to store with it. I spent hours studying satellite maps of the area around Michael's town. I wanted him dead, but more than that, I wanted him to suffer. A quick death wouldn't be enough. I wanted to humiliate and degrade him publicly. As I planned, I realized that eliminating him outright wasn't sufficient. He needed to know that it was Rachel's husband who had taken him down, but I couldn't leave any evidence behind. I smiled to myself, imagining the justice he would face. Rachel wasn't getting off easy either. I contacted a tough lawyer, recommended by my boss, with the goal of threatening the university with a lawsuit. I wanted to make them regret ever approving Rachel's research. I didn't care about the legalities. I just wanted their attention. The lawyer sent a letter to the university president and the board of trustees, threatening a $20 million lawsuit. Their response came quickly. Rachel's degree hadn't been granted yet, and the board hadn't given final approval. My lawyer demanded that they reject her research entirely and revoke her thesis, with no chance for appeal. In less than 2 weeks, the board passed a resolution instructing the president to correct the department's findings, reprimanding those involved, and denying Rachel's degree. They even contacted her publisher, forbidding them from using the university's name in connection with her book, and froze her research grant account. I felt a twisted satisfaction. Weeks later, the university couldn't reach Rachel. They contacted my lawyer, who provided Rachel's divorce lawyer's contact info, along with her mother's and Michael's addresses. Rachel wasn't at our former home, and I wondered where she was. Despite everything, I couldn't help but worry about her and the unborn child. Though I hated what she had done to me, I still had another plan in mind, one that would send a clear message to Michael. I carefully put together a formal document, designed to resemble the Declaration of Independence, and filled it with scripture quotes meant to intimidate him. After several revisions, I printed it on high-quality linen paper, placed it in an elegant holder, and took extra care to make sure there were no fingerprints on it. Once everything was just right, I felt ready. I was confident that Michael's superstitious nature, combined with his belief in new revelations and divine visitations, would make him view the document as a message from God. I chuckled to myself, pleased with how things were coming together. I was using my strengths against his weaknesses, exactly as my brother had advised. Next, I turned my attention to preparing for the trips ahead. One was to confront Michael, and the other would take me to Africa, where I wouldn't return. I imagined myself as the avenging angel, appearing from nowhere and disappearing without a trace. I loved the idea, but I knew that any mistake could lead to disaster. To make sure everything went smoothly, I had to research, practice, and remain entirely secretive. Thanks to the internet, gathering information was easier than ever, compared to the days of visiting libraries where my every move could be traced. I studied maps and memorized the layout of Michael's farm, knowing the crops he planted, his work schedule, and where he liked to take breaks. Detailed satellite images, far more comprehensive than anything public, showed every feature of the land. I found the perfect location, a small ridge by a tree near his wheat field, a place where I could hide and strike. I had chosen the battlefield, and it was to my advantage. Weeks of intense planning followed. I spent time studying human anatomy, focusing on the best way to remove one of Michael's testicles. My goal was to leave him with his sexual desire but deny him the ability to fulfill it. A fitting form of revenge, I thought. After all, he had taken my wife, so I would take away his sexual satisfaction. The plan felt justified, but I knew the risks. I didn't want to end up behind bars, so I meticulously worked out every detail. I bought supplies from various stores, always paying in cash, and even ordered makeup, a fake beard, and oversized shoes online from a thrift store. Then, one morning, my lawyer interrupted my plans. Rachel had signed the divorce papers and wasn't contesting anything. There would be no need for a court appearance. The papers were filed, and the 60-day waiting period began. My lawyer also informed me that Rachel's lawyer had been told about the university's decision to revoke her degree, and apparently, Rachel lost it. She was devastated. She had lost everything, including her degree and her reputation. I felt some guilt for the way her mother had been affected, but Rachel had brought all of this on herself. Our house sold quickly, and we divided the proceeds equally. Rachel didn't want to stay there, and honestly, I didn't care where she went. I had my own future to sort out. Oddly, I lost all interest in sex. My energy was completely consumed by the project at hand, and I hoped that my desires would return later. Rachel had been my only partner, and at this point I didn't find anyone else appealing. Not even her. During this time, I stayed in contact with the office and even did some pre-trip planning with my boss. My trip to Africa would provide a perfect cover if needed. I reached out to a tech-savvy friend who helped me obtain fake passports, IDs, and other essential documents. Together, we made arrangements for me to leave the country, with him taking my place on the first leg of the journey. Our plan was to swap identities briefly, giving me a solid alibi while I dealt with Michael. Everything was in place. My friend and I coordinated our schedules and flights. I packed up my supplies, rented a storage unit, and secured a rental car. Wearing gloves, I made sure to leave no fingerprints, then changed into a disguise before heading to Michael's town. I made sure I was seen by the locals but didn't engage with anyone. I thought I saw Rachel, but I couldn't be sure. I secretly hoped she would witness the justice I was about to deliver. With that, I left without saying a word, ready to move forward with the final phase of my plan. That night, I took my position 20 yards from Michael's usual resting spot beneath the lone tree, hidden under desert camouflage. I double-checked everything, including the dosage for the dart. The weapon was designed for tranquilizing large African wildlife, and I loaded it to knock out an animal weighing around 300 pounds, assuming Michael was close to 280 pounds. As predicted, Michael appeared around noon, working in the wheat field, and eventually took a break under the tree. I aimed for his gluteus maximus and fired. He swatted at the dart, but it was too late. Emerging from my hiding place, now dressed in all white without the beard, I wanted him to see my face clearly. I had about 20 seconds before the tranquilizer took effect. I rushed over to him, shouting, "Michael, God has heard the cries of James Bennett, Rachel's real husband. You have sinned, and I am the avenging angel sent to deliver God's punishment." Michael tried to stand but collapsed, his eyes wide with fear. He couldn't speak, and I made sure he saw me before he lost consciousness. No one was around to witness what happened. Although I wasn't naturally violent, I didn't hesitate now. With Michael out cold, I acted quickly, pulling down his coveralls and underwear to expose his genitals. I tied a tight ligature around the base and used a surgical knife to remove most of his penis, leaving only a small stump. After applying astringent to stop the bleeding, I tied off his remaining testicle, removed one, and secured the other with cotton string. I draped the removed testicle around his neck as a grim trophy and put the rest in a bag with preservative solution. There was minimal bleeding and I felt satisfied with the result. Michael would survive, but without his manhood. I left a note in the shape of the avenging angel's message, with the testicle resting on top as a gruesome display. I didn't stick around to gloat. Once I had everything, I erased all signs of my presence and left, carefully making it look like someone else was responsible. I destroyed all evidence, burned my clothes and equipment, and even switched out the car tires before returning the vehicle. Using a fake passport, I boarded a flight to South Africa, carrying Michael's severed organ as a twisted trophy. Calm and even content, I traveled. My friend and I met in South Africa, exchanged pleasantries, then parted ways while I continued my work in Africa. Back home, Rachel returned, depressed and scared of Michael, who had become more violent since losing his manhood. She eventually left him, moved back in with her mother, and raised her child as a single mom. She never finished her PhD. Although I thought about reconnecting with her, I couldn't face the idea of raising Michael's child on what would have been our 10th anniversary. I sent Rachel the preserved organ as a final, twisted gesture. By then, I had moved on with a new life and family. In the end, no one really won. Rachel lost her PhD, Michael lost his manhood, and Rachel and I both lost the woman I had once loved.